So Jesus has been teaching, and he turns to his disciples and he tells them, you know what, the Passover is coming, and during that time, I am going to be killed. But don't worry, because when I come back to life, I am going to go ahead of you, and I'm going to meet you in Galilee. Also at that time, the chief priests gather together with the elders, and they sit down and they think about, how can we kill Jesus? We don't like what he's saying. We think he is blaspheming and lying about himself. And we need to make sure that all of these people that have started following him, we need to make sure that they are dispersed and that nobody listens to him because he's a liar and we don't want him to be lying to the people. So Jesus goes to his friend's house. He goes to the house of this man named Simon the leper. And while he's there, they're having dinner, and this lady comes in with some very expensive perfume. And she comes in and she pours the perfume on Jesus' feet. And the disciples are watching this happen, and they're like, what? This was such a waste. Like, we are supposed to be righteous people. We're supposed to be giving to the poor. And this woman, she could have sold this perfume and given that to the poor, but instead she just wasted it by putting it on Jesus' feet. We don't know what's up with that. But Jesus hears what they're saying and knows what they're thinking. And he says, hold on, guys. Stop being silly. This is a beautiful thing that she has done for me. And you know what? You're always going to have poor people with you. Day in, day out, year after year, decades and centuries, there will always be poor people. But you're not always going to have me here on this earth with you in this way. And what she has done is such a beautiful thing. And she has prepared me for burial by putting this perfume on my feet. And you know what? Not only has she done something beautiful and amazing, but she is going to be known throughout history for having done this to me. And everywhere that the gospel is proclaimed, this story is going to be told in memory of her. And Judas sees all this, and he hears all this, and he's pretty upset. And he's heard what Jesus has said up to this point, and he knows that the chief priests and the Pharisees and the elders of the Jewish nation are trying to kill Jesus. And so Judas goes and he talks to them, and he says, hey guys, there's some weird stuff happening, and I know that you want to kill Jesus, and maybe we could work out a deal. And I was just wondering, what would you give somebody if they handed Jesus over to you? What would that look like? How would that go down? And so he has a conversation with the chief priests and the elders, and they agree to give Judas 30 pieces of silver if Judas will turn Jesus over to them. So Judas says, yeah, great, cool, done and done. So the time of the Passover has come, and they're about to enter into Jerusalem. So Jesus tells his disciples, hey guys, go in, you're going to go into the town and you're going to find this person and tell him that my time is getting near and that I want to celebrate the Passover with my disciples in his home. And he will show you where to go and help you prepare everything. Now, this passage that I'm telling you today comes from Matthew chapters 26 and 27. Some of the other books of the Bible have some different details and some more details about how this all happens. I'm just going to stick with this text today. Definitely go and read it for yourself, and also go check out the other passages if you're interested. And while you're reading, ask yourself, what does this passage teach you about God, and what does this passage teach you about humanity? And is there anything in your life that needs to change because of this passage? So Jesus is ready to celebrate the Passover with his disciples. So he goes into town and sits down, and they have the delicious meal together. And they're dipping their hands in the bowl together and just sharing this wonderful feast and this joy and this celebration. And he looks at them and he tells them, you know what, guys? One of you is going to betray me. And they all start going around the table and they say to Jesus, is it me? Is it me? Surely it's not me. It's not me, is it, Jesus? And Jesus tells them, it's one of you who has dipped his hand in the bowl with me. And Judas says, surely it's not me, Lord, is it? And Jesus says, yes, it's you. And they continue sharing this meal, and Jesus takes the bread and he breaks the bread and he shares it among the disciples. And he says, this is my body that is broken for you. And he does something similar with the cup of wine. He pours it and he hands it to his disciples, and he says, all of you should drink from this cup, because the truth is, This wine is my blood. It is the blood of a new covenant that is going to bring so many people from so many nations to salvation in me. And every time you do this, you should do this in remembrance of me." And then they finish up dinner and they sing a hymn. They go out to a garden where they've often spent time in this garden together, and they go there and spend some time. And as they're going, Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, "You know, in the past, there was this scripture that was written about me, and it said that the shepherd would be struck and all of the sheep would scatter. And that's going to happen tonight. I am going to be struck down and you are all going to scatter and leave me." And Peter says, "Hold up. That is not going to happen. I will never leave you, Jesus. I will follow you always." And Jesus tells Peter, "So it's nighttime right now, and there's not that many hours until the morning. And you tell me that you're going to follow me forever and you would never deny me. But the truth is, before the rooster crows, not that many hours from now, you will have denied me. And not just once. You will have denied me 3 times. And Peter says, "No way, Lord. I would never, ever deny you. Even if I have to die myself, I will not deny you." And all of the disciples chime in and they say, "Yes, Lord, we would never deny you. We are all with Peter. We will not deny you. We're in this 100%. So they go out to the garden, and Jesus takes a couple of his disciples, and they go off to the side and they pray together. And Jesus leaves his disciples there, and he says, "You know what? I am really distressed in my spirit, and I am so filled with sorrow, even to the point of death. So you guys just stay here for a minute. I'm going to go a little farther and pray, and just keep watch for me as I'm praying." So Jesus goes and he prays and he talks to God and he says, "Father, I know what's coming, and it fills me with so much sorrow, and it's like you've given me this cup of something that I need to drink, but it feels like I almost cannot drink it. It's so hard to drink, and I was just wondering if maybe there's another way, and maybe you could take this cup from me, and maybe I don't have to drink it, if there's any other way that this could happen. But even so, I trust you, God, and I will drink this cup if it's your will. I choose to lay down my own will, and I choose to follow your will, God, and not my own will." And then Jesus goes back and he checks on his disciples, and he sees that they're sleeping. And so he wakes them up and says, "Hey guys, wake up. Can't you just stay awake for a little while with me? It's kind of a big deal. Could you please stay awake and pray? And pray for yourselves too, because you said just a little while ago that you would stand by me even unto death. And I know that your spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak. So you should pray. Take this time to pray that you would not fall into temptation." And Jesus goes and he prays again, and he says the same thing. He says, "Father, take this cup from me. Please let there be another way. But if there's not another way, I accept your will and I will do your will. I will do your will, no matter the cost." And then he goes back again to his disciples and he sees that they're still sleeping. And he says, and he goes back and he prays again, and he says the same thing to God again, asking that God would just take the cup from him and telling him, "Not my will, God, but I will choose your will. Whatever your will is, I will take it." And then he goes back to his disciples a 3rd time and sees they're still asleep. But he can't let them sleep any longer, so he wakes them up and says, "Hey guys, wake up. The time has come. My betrayer is coming." And then Judas comes over the hill, and he's there with a crowd of soldiers, and they're there to arrest Jesus. And he comes up to Jesus, and he had told the soldiers beforehand, "I will show you who is Jesus, who is the person you should arrest. And I'm going to do this by kissing him." And so he goes up and he kisses Jesus. And Jesus says to Judas, "Do what you came for." And so they arrest Jesus. And as they're arresting Jesus, one of the disciples takes out a sword and cuts off the ear of one of the high priest's servants. And he's bleeding and "Oh no, my ear fell off." Jesus says, "Hey, put that sword away. This is not the time for this. What do you think? Do you think that I'm weak and wimpy and I have no authority or power over any angels in heaven? No, The truth is, if I called on my Father in heaven, he would send me not just a couple angels, not just some angels to match this mob. He would send me more than 12 legions of angels if I just asked him. So put your sword away. This is not the time for fighting. And so also Jesus heals the man's ear. I don't remember if that's in this story, but another one. But it seems like an important thing to mention, even if it's not in this story. And Jesus looks at the crowd and he says, you're here with clubs or you're here with swords. And why are you doing it this way? I was with you every day in the temple preaching and teaching, and you never tried to arrest me then. But I guess this is the way that it has to be, because scriptures have been prophesied about me, and this is just a fulfillment of those prophecies. So all of the disciples scatter and run away and desert Jesus, except for Peter. Peter runs away and deserts Jesus, but then he looks back and is like, oh, I should follow them. So he sees the soldiers taking Jesus away, and he sneaks along behind them and follows Jesus to the home of Caiaphas. And Caiaphas is there with the priests and with the Pharisees, and they all sit down together and they talk about what are they going to do with Jesus. Now they've arrested him and they want to put him to death, but they have to have the Roman governor put him to death. So they need some evidence to bring to the Roman governor. So they sit down and they're talking about it, and they have all kinds of liars come before them and tell them, Jesus said this, Jesus did that, and we think he should be killed because of this reason and that reason. But they're having trouble coming up with any excuse to kill Jesus. They don't have any real evidence for reasons why Jesus should be put to death. And so somebody finally comes along and says, you know what, I heard Jesus say that he was going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. He sounds like a terrorist, and that sounds like something we should not allow to happen in our country or our city, so he should definitely be put to death for that, right? And the high priest looks at Jesus and says, Jesus, you are not answering any of the things these people are saying about you. Come on, tell us something have we hit on anything that's true? So the high priest puts Jesus under oath and says, in the name of the God of heaven that we serve as Jewish people, I command you to tell me the truth. Are you the Messiah? And Jesus says, yes, I am the Messiah. It is as you have said. And not just that, but you are going to see me seated at the right hand of God, and you are going to see me coming on the clouds with power. And the chief priest said, why are we here any longer? This is obviously all of the proof that we need. He has blasphemed. He deserves to be put to death. This is not okay. People cannot be saying these things. And so they start abusing Jesus. They start hitting him and spitting on him and mocking him. And they say, prophesy to us, Son of God, who hit you? Meanwhile, out in the courtyard, Peter's hanging out, trying to stick around and see if he can find out what's going to happen to Jesus. And while he's there, he's chatting with the guards, and this girl comes up and says, you were one of those guys who was with Jesus. And Peter says, no way. I don't know what you're talking about. So he's hanging out a little longer, and then he goes outside. He's like, maybe I shouldn't be in here. That girl recognized me. And this other girl comes up and she says, wait, weren't you with Jesus? Hey guys, this guy was with Jesus. And Peter says, no, I was not with Jesus. I do not know what you're talking about. And he's hanging out and he's chatting with them a little longer. And one of the people says, wait, I recognize your accent. You were definitely from Galilee. You were definitely with Jesus. And Peter starts calling curses on himself and says, no way. I am not with Jesus. I don't know what you're talking about. But if I'm lying, let me be cursed. And at that moment, a rooster crows. And Peter remembers what Jesus said earlier, that he would deny him 3 times before the rooster crows. And he is heartbroken by this because he really truly believed that he would follow Jesus to death. And he saw that he was not able to follow through with that. And so he goes out and he weeps bitterly, brokenhearted because of what he has done. So it's now early morning. And the chief priests are like, yes, we got our case. Let's take him to the governor. So they take him to Pilate, who's the governor. Meanwhile, Judas realizes what has happened, and he realizes that Jesus has been condemned to death. And he is full of guilt and shame, and he hates what he's done, that he's betrayed Jesus, and he hates the money that he got in exchange for Jesus's life. And so he takes that money back to the temple and he says, I have betrayed innocent blood and I cannot keep this money. And the chief priests look at Judas and they're like, well, sounds like a personal problem to us. We are not involved. You took the money, take the money and get out here. And Judas can't keep the money. And so he leaves the money behind him. He leaves it in the temple and he leaves. And he's so full of guilt and shame that he hangs himself. And the chief priests look at each other and they say, well, what are we going to do with this money? How? Like, we can't put it in the treasury because it's blood money. So what should we do? Well, we've been needing to buy a burial place for foreigners. So let's use this money for that. So that's what they do. They go and they buy a field, a plot of land that they can use to bury foreigners. And this is a fulfillment of prophecy. In the Old Testament, in Jeremiah, it said that Jeremiah went and he bought a field of blood. And that is what this field was. I don't know if I quite have the Jeremiah summarization right. So go ahead and look that up for yourself. It is repeated in this passage. Meanwhile, Jesus is before Pilate. And Pilate asks Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, yeah, it's true. Exactly as you say it is. And the chief priests are there with the Pharisees, and they're bringing all kinds of accusations against Jesus. And Jesus is just silent before them and doesn't say anything in response. And Pilate asks Jesus, aren't you going to say anything? These are wild accusations that these guys are bringing against you. Is any of this true? But Jesus is just silent and he doesn't answer. And Pilate is really impressed with Jesus and he looks for a way to set Jesus free. He had a message from his wife earlier in the day, and she said that she had suffered much in a dream because of Jesus and that Jesus was innocent and he should definitely set Jesus free. And so he says, okay, what can I do? Well, the chief priests really want Jesus to be killed, so let me find somebody that they definitely don't want released and offer them up those two choices. And then they'll choose Jesus and it will be fine, no problem. So Pilate goes and he finds this prisoner whose name is Barabbas. And he presents the two people, Jesus and Barabbas, before the people and says, hey, it's the custom that I release a prisoner for you guys during this celebration. So which one would you like? Jesus or Barabbas? And the chief priests stir up the people and get the people to say, we want Barabbas to be released. We don't want Jesus to be released. Give us Barabbas. And Pilate says, but what about Jesus? Like, he hasn't done anything wrong. And they say, no, we want Barabbas. And they're getting more and more urgent about this, almost like starting to start a riot. And so Pilate starts to get a little nervous and he says, okay, well, in that case, what do you want me to do with Jesus? And they all cry that they want Jesus to be crucified. And so he decides to go ahead and get into the crowd. And he hands Jesus over. So the soldiers take Jesus and they beat him and they decide to have some fun with him. So they bring him into a place and they bring all their soldier friends around and they dress Jesus up. They put on a fancy robe and a crown of thorns and they give him a staff and they pretend to praise him and worship him and say, oh, the king of the Jews. And they mock him and they spit on him and all the things. And then they give him back his old clothes and they take him off and they are ready to crucify him. But he's kind of weak, so they need to find somebody to carry his cross for him. So they find this man named Simon of Cyrene, and this man carries Jesus's cross, and they go up to a place called Golgotha, or the place of the skull. And there he's crucified. He's crucified right in the middle of two other men, two robbers. One is on his right and one is on his left. And they put him up there, they nail him to the cross. And they say to each other, you know, these clothes are pretty nice. And we don't think they should go to waste. This man's dying. He's not going to need them anymore. So since we're sitting around here just waiting for him to die, let's go ahead and play a game. And whoever wins the game can have the clothes. So they sit there and they cast lots for Jesus's clothes. And everybody who sees Jesus and mocks him, and they say, oh yeah, you're the one who said that you were going to raise the temple in 3 days, but here you are on the cross and nobody's going to help you now. Where is your God now? Who are you? What are you? Blah, 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 all the things. And so they're mocking him as they walk by, and the chief priests are mocking him, and the soldiers are mocking him. And even the two robbers who are crucified with Jesus are mocking him. Now, there is more information about the robbers in some of the other passages. but I'm not going to go into that today. You can check that out for yourself. Eventually, after about 3 hours, Jesus cries out in a loud voice. He says in his own language, in Aramaic, I think it's Aramaic, says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And that means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And the people who are there hear this and they say, he's crying out to Elijah. Let Elijah save him. Let his God save him. Like, we don't think anybody can save him. Obviously, he's here being crucified. He can't be saved. And somebody runs and gets a sponge with some vinegar on it and lifts it up to Jesus' mouth so he can drink. But Jesus doesn't take any of it. And shortly after that, he cries out in a loud voice and he gives up his spirit and he dies. And as soon as Jesus dies, the curtain in the temple is torn from the top to the bottom, a miraculous thing. And there's a huge earthquake and the tombs are broken open and people who are holy and righteous God followers come back to life and they come out of the tombs and they walk around in the city and people are like, you died. I went to your funeral. What happened? And the soldiers see this. They see that people are coming back to life and they see that the curtain was torn and they realize this really is the Son of God. All those things that he claimed that he was, those are real. And he died and all these people came back to life. And this is crazy. And the soldiers believe in Jesus. And there's a bunch of women there who had been following Jesus and they've been providing for his needs. And they're there and they're watching. And 3 women are mentioned, 3 Marys. One is Mary of Magdalene. One is Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. And one is Mary, I think it's the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee. But you should go check that out for yourself. And there's a man named Joseph of Arimathea. And he sees that Jesus has died, and he knows that Jesus needs to be buried. And so he goes to Pilate, and he says, hey, Pilate, Jesus has died, and I would like to have his body so that I can bury it. So Pilate gives permission for him to take the body off of the cross. And Joseph and the women, they go and they take Jesus' body, and they wrap it up, and they bury it in this tomb. It was Joseph's own tomb that he had carved for himself, and he buries Jesus in his tomb, and he puts a large stone over the front of the tomb so that nobody will disturb the body and no creatures will disturb the body. And the next day, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law and the priests, they go to Pilate and they say, you know, Pilate, this guy Jesus, he said some pretty crazy things about himself. He said he is going to come back to life on the 3rd day, and we know that he's a liar. But we just are concerned about his disciples. We think that maybe his disciples will come and steal the body and then tell people that he came back to life. So we were wondering if you could maybe send some soldiers to guard the tomb so nobody can steal the body. And Pilate says, okay, fine, take whatever guards you need and just seal up the tomb however you want. And that is where the story of Jesus' death ends. But it's not the end of the story, so stay tuned for the next part.